So, folks, I was on the Lines Transatlantic Call-In show. Yet again, I co-hosted with Luxander, taking calls about trans issues ranging from advice to spicy debate. Check it out.
Let's get Alex, any/all pronouns from Alabama. Alex, you are live on the line with Luxander and Riverboat. Jack, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we
great.
can.
Okay, awesome.
What is
nice to meet
your
you guys. I
topic for
appreciate
today?
your time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I grew up in Alabama. I'm 27. It's one of those things. Whenever I grew up, I didn't really think about any kind of gender problems and stuff like that. I always just grew up calling everybody dude, girl, just running around. I didn't see much issue with it.
Sure.
You still hear me?
Yep. Can you maybe just take the microphone and pull it a couple inches away from your face?
That's the stream on in the background. That's what was
Oh, yeah, that does make it a little
confusing. Can you hear me
confusing.
right now?
Yeah. Can you just, when you have the microphone, can you move it like a couple inches further away from your face? Because the audio keeps spiking.
Yeah, this is better?
That is better. Cool. All right. So yeah, continue with your topic.
So my issue is that some of the things, despite not having any issue with them, I feel like the ball's been rolling so fast, a lot of things are getting lost in translation amongst different people in the community. For example, I grew up in high school. I'm sure you guys know about like the trap stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, familiar.
Whenever I was in high school, all the guys were going around showing stuff like that, and they were basically femboys, and I didn't feel that uncomfortable about it, but you can tell it made all the other guys feel very uncomfortable. I don't know if that's because they weren't comfortable where they were at, or if it was genuinely something that upset them. I don't know. But my thought on that was always, it's not really a big deal. But for instance, something like stealthing, I think is a bigger deal. And something me and my wife had talked about before was that if I was on a date with somebody, my assumption would be they would be female. If I take them back home and they have the opposite genitalia, it's not necessarily that I would have an issue with that, but I would prefer honesty up front. Is that necessarily strange to ask for or to consider?
I don't think so. But you also have to realize that the reason trans people tend to stealth is out of a concern for their safety, right? Like
Absolutely.
they're not, and so for me personally, as like a best practice, if you were going on a date with somebody, I've always been upfront, but also that can come with its own dangers because there are some people who deliberately try and like honeypot trans women in particular.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It can be a whole problem. So it's a messy social situation. And I understand the desire for honesty. And as a general rule, I'm all about honesty and forthrightness. I think it's the best policy, especially when dating or especially when going on dates or going into any kind of sexual scenario. Absolutely. So there's that element. And then there's just also the element of like some trans people, they think it's obvious that they're trans. And so they don't necessarily want to have a potentially super awkward conversation. And they just kind of assume that everyone can tell that they're trans, which is not necessarily the case. And so it's a messy social situation. And honestly, I think the best policy is just asking up front, like, hey, how do you identify? And like having those conversations up front from both sides in a date, you know? So yes, totally understand where you're coming from.
That's a wonderful answer. I appreciate it. Because that's one of the things me and my wife had talked about, because I kind of feel the same way as you. The idea is hopefully whoever you're engaging with would be willing to have that, open conversation with you in the beginning. But me and my wife are both speculators. Neither one of us are trans, so we were both just looking at it from the outside in. And for a lot of these progressive issues, I work in a plant. And so I work with mostly rather conservative men. And so I try to work and be in the middle, but then sometimes they'll bring those things to me, and I don't have an answer other than like you said. So I'm trying to find ways to maybe expand my mind a bit to where I can understand the situation better. Because like for stuff like, I don't know if you guys know the artist is Brokey or Brokey.
I don't think so.
I don't know that one.
they're a rap artist, but they're trans femme, if I'm not using the improper term. You know, and again, I don't see any problem with that, because just like with the idea of like with the traps and femboy stuff, to me, femininity isn't just what you have in your pants, just like masculinity, you know, because I grew up, and whenever I grew up, like I said, I'm only 27, but there were in high school, there were some women that were dykes, and, you know, that's totally awesome and cool, and that's just who they were. But it's one of those things where I'm trying to figure out how to have those conversations with people, because, you know, rudely, but someone would say, you know, it's a lady with a penis. And I'm like, that's not the case. They're just more feminine than they are masculine. And they're like, well, that's not how sex is. And I'm like, well, see, you've already missed the marker, because we're not talking about sex. We're talking about gender.
I mean, yeah, it's a complicated area with lots of crossover. And like, you know, when it comes to dating in particular, I heard a really great talk one time at a convention that was one of the speakers said, like, when you're talking about like sex conversations, or like how to have safe sex or hooking up or whatever, there are like pants on conversations and pants off conversations. So it's like, you know, you want to negotiate certain things before the pants come off. So like, I'm of the opinion, yeah. So like, when the pants are off, you can be like, I want you to touch me there or whatever. Or like, if you have like a hard don't touch me there, that might be a pants on. Like, before you get in the heat of the moment, you might want to be like, okay, by the way, we're not doing this at all. You know, and like, I think that a lot of those conversations, we could do more to kind of promote those conversations, because it feels really awkward, I think, for folks to have safe sex conversations. So I am of the opinion, especially because trans people have different interests and different needs, right? Like, if you try to have sex with a trans woman who has not had bottom surgery, she might be like, don't touch my genitals at all. We're doing butt stuff only tonight. So yeah, when I think of stealth, I guess I think more of like people who've already had surgery. And so those kind of conversations are maybe a little bit less fraught. Like, there's less opportunity for things to go wrong in that situation.
Mm-hmm. And see, in my opinion, because again, I feel like it's not really the best phrasing, but I didn't know a better way to put it. You know, if you've already had bottom surgery, not that it's, you know, validates or unvalidates anything, but just the idea of, I don't really see a reason why a male partner or female partner should have issue at that point, personally. But that's like I was talking to my wife about, is just, it's concerning to me whenever, you know, the genitalia doesn't match the perception. But that's not necessarily that person's fault. Like you said, the situation has a lot more nuance and complexity. But I was just trying to find a way to, and you've helped me a lot as far as how to articulate and explain that to somebody else who may not understand as well.
And I would also add to that, like, you know, there's a lot of burden on trans people in the dating space when we're having this conversation to disclose. So by this, I mean, like, if you are a person who is very like, I definitely don't want to interact with a penis ever, and I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying, for example, then why is the burden not on you to state that on the first date? Like, why is the burden, on the trans person? So, you know, if you have a genital aversion where you're like, I refuse to engage with this, then it should be part of your regular kind of dating profile behavior to state that, and in a way that's like, this is my preference. And if your body is like that, that's cool. I'm just not going to be interested. So like, I think that there's an interesting conversation to have about like shifting who is like, why does the trans person need to say that they're trans when the bigot should say that they're a bigot? And, you know, if you don't want to have a relationship with somebody who can't have kids, that's up to you to say that on the first date or whatever. Like, you know, the person who's dealing with infertility, you know, maybe that's not like a central part of what they want to tell you on the first date kind of situation. So yeah, I do think it's like an interesting topic with some complexities and nuance, and that we should all be more comfortable having those conversations openly.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm not gonna lie, I really appreciate, and I really think that was a wonderful example, because like you said, just with the idea of using fertility as a topic, because like you said, that may not be something you talk about the first, second, or third time, but it is something that would typically come up in conversation when you talk about your desires and wants. Yeah.
So like, if a trans person's had bottom surgery, they don't have their fertility anymore. And so that might be a conversation that should matter if you're going to be in a long-term relationship, but for your hookup, it probably doesn't matter that much.
Yep.
Well, see, to be honest with you, it's one of those things I just didn't even think about it. Just even in the situation of a cis relationship, if I was going to go out and look for a partner to date, and then, if I wanted to have kids or she wanted to have kids and I've had a vasectomy, that's not going to happen. That's a conversation that has to happen somewhere, I would imagine early on. And I think that's just a really good analogy to compare those two. So I want to give you credit for that because I had never thought of it like that before. That's really clever.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally.
And I do just want to mention, sorry, my voice is a little bit rough right now. Just for your edification, dyke and trap, they are both broadly considered slurs outside of a few kind of in-group references. And I know you didn't mean anything by it. Just letting you know.
Well, I'll say I appreciate that because that's one of those things that, and I understand I'm in Alabama. So maybe our terminology is back behind, but I grew up with a lady that, I would call, she called herself a dyke to me. And that's whenever I started using that terminology because she was hanging around my family and I was like 8 years old. And I didn't realize what was going on. And to be honest with you, I assumed that she was a man until we had more conversations and stuff like that. And she opened up to me. And so that's kind of one of the things too. It's like, whenever I think about something like the old terminology, I can see how it gets outdated and pushed to the side. But I also, I just kind of wonder, whenever we talk to people that don't agree with us, we end up running into a lot of hiccups with terminology and language. And I'm in no way saying that, someone should take getting hit in the head as far as like, someone misgendering or calling you a word you don't want to call, like we talk about being a slur. But I just wonder, at what point do we work with the apple and cut off the bruised parts and the rotten parts and still let it be that apple until we can get a good apple out of it? Does that kind of make sense? Because I've had a lot of people that whenever I've said things like that, referencing just particular words, and then they'll go off saying, well, that's a slur, or, oh, well, this or that. And I'm not trying to diminish what that person's saying, but some people, that's the terminology that they have. And whenever I shut them down saying, well, that's not a word you can use, they immediately get upset and they say, well, you won't even let me speak. And I know, and that's not what's happening, but they immediately shut down because they feel villainized, which, again, I can understand, to some degree, they are the villain. But I worry that one of the problems we have is we have so many villains out there that don't realize that they don't have to be. And I'm trying to find a way to get those people back on the right side.
I think if you're proactive about offering a different term, like, like you wouldn't say the N-word, you would say like a black person. And so a gentle course correction. So if for you, I would be like, by the way, dyke is what lesbians call themselves. But if you were describing somebody, then you would probably want to just say butch lesbian, like, or just a butch, to describe like that masculinity being expressed and like that they are lesbians. And then like trap is considered to be inappropriate because it's like it portrays trans women and people like that as being inherently deceptive. And so it's just like, and it's also a highly sexualized term as well. It would be like calling them a she-male, right? Like that's a porn category. That's not a person. So yeah, there's just like, I would just be like, just to let you know, and you're not like trying to, stifle their free speech or whatever, and just like offering the gentle correction and like by the way, this other word might be a little bit of a better word. And for you, as somebody in Alabama and like outside of the communities, you don't necessarily have all that terminology. So I'm not expecting you to be fully equipped that way. But those are just like a couple gifts that I would give you in terms of like how to update that terminology.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I'll take that to heart and I'll do my best to try and do that moving forward. My only other question, just
go ahead.
Go for it.
I'm sorry, you saying something?
I was just going to say, honestly, just doing your best is mostly what people are asking. And, you don't got to be perfect.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I was kind of curious on the other side of that, because I have friends that are, part of the community and things like that, and I hang around them. A lot of the times, I'm just a cis white guy. I have no problem with that. A lot of the jokes are about cis white guys. Most of the time, I'm laughing too. I think it's funny. But I've noticed that some of the people within the group are starting to feel uncomfortable, and they're coming to me and saying, well, we're not talking about you, or, that joke wasn't about you. And I appreciate that they're trying to validate me, saying, I'm not whatever it is they're making the joke about. But I was kind of curious to what you would think about, if there was a cis man in that situation, how to make those people feel more comfortable, because I don't know if it's conversations they've had amongst themselves to where they feel like they're attacking me because they shouldn't. I've told them all that before, but I've noticed that, they seem less likely to make those jokes in my presence. And it's okay if they don't want to do that because they're doing it for the sake of not trying to make me uncomfortable, but it seems just kind of like an awkward spot between allies and members of the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand people feeling sensitive about jokes being made at their expense, right? And it doesn't even have necessarily to do with like your identity. Although like the reason why that's more sensitive is because you don't have any control. You don't have any control over whether you're cis or whether you're heterosexual or whatever. So, jokes being made at that particular expense, especially if the whole punchline is, haha, you're straight. But like if I were to make a joke evoking the idea that straight men really don't like their wives, which is like a classic stand-up thing. And so if I were to make a joke at their expense and be like, oh, well, I don't know, I'm not like a comedian. I'm not going to try to come up with something on the spot right now. But like a joke at the expense of like men who hate their wives, then like I'm playing on a specific trope, and the idea is not necessarily that they are straight, but rather that they have this issue where they get married to people they don't even like. So there is a way to do jokes cleverly, and there's a way to do jokes that like my experience with this is like when people make jokes about trans people, the whole joke is that they're trans. Like there's like a Dave Chappelle joke where he's talking about a drunk trans woman who falls on the floor and like you can see her balls out of her skirt. And so the whole joke is, haha, woman has balls. So the whole punchline of the joke is that a woman is trans, or like that a woman has genitals that you don't expect, rather than like you can make clever jokes about trans women that don't ultimately just come down to like, haha, the existence of their bodies is humorous because it's jarring or unexpected or whatever. So I do think the ways that you approach humor, or the ways that humor is approached, are different in that way also. Like I don't know very many jokes where it's just like, haha, you're straight, and like that's the sum total of the joke, if that makes any sense. But sometimes jokes are going to land wrong regardless of your intention as well, or regardless of how cleverly they're constructed. As an example that comes to my mind, the idea of man versus bear, like women, a woman's going down a trail. Do they want to encounter a man or a bear? And very clearly that is talking about kind of the general concept of men. It's not talking about specific men. And the men who tend to feel really called out by that joke are, they are men who make women feel uncomfortable. But they're the men that should have been traded for the bear. Right. Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of like, I think, a similar dynamic that might be happening where like, the jokes that friend group is making are not directed at you because they're directed in a, towards a group you might be a part of, but not at you. Does that make sense? In a similar way to the man versus bear. Absolutely. I can understand that. That's one of the things, cool thing about comedy is you can punch up. And like I said, I'm a cis white guy. If anyone deserves some punching, it's people like me, and that's fine. But I'm trying to find a way to make them feel more comfortable, I guess, to make fun of me, because I've expressed to them that it's okay, and I see them poke and jab at each other and laugh and have fun. And I'm not necessarily talking at it as far as like, I feel left out, I want to be a part of that, so I want to be able to make jokes and then make jokes with me. But the last thing I want to do is be in their presence and make them feel uncomfortable enough that they can't say something that would make them and their friends, and like I said, more than likely me, laugh as well. Make jokes at your own expense I would be like, I'm breaking the ice. True. I'm making fun of myself. Okay. Well, see, that's kind of what I was wondering, because it's one of those things where I didn't want to seem self-deprecating. But at the same time, that's kind of what I thought too. I was like, I need to start researching some good jokes to tell about myself and maybe help buffer it down. Yeah, I think that's a good approach to kind of bring things to that level, and to know like, to really display like, I'm okay with being made fun of. I'm even willing to make fun of myself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a big difference between
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a big difference between like being self-deprecating in like a weird way where you're like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Oh, like
I'm the worst.
Versus like doing a smarter self-deprecating joke about like the wider group you're a part of. Yeah, a lot of trans girls do that.
Okay, I guess the only other thing I was kind of curious about was as far as the general trans community, I'm not as versed as far as like the, I'm not trying to make fun, I don't know, but however many different genders there are, you know, because I know there's a bunch of different ones. And again, it's one of those things where I feel like people are losing the idea in the sauce, you know, like if I'm not mistaken, like the idea of being like an astral gender would be like your attachment to the cosmos. But to me, that doesn't seem like gender as much as it would something like spirituality. And so I was just kind of curious, as far as like different genders go, are those also under the umbrella of the community, or is that something that just the internet has been talking about and it kind of looks like it's a part of it?
For context, I'm non-binary, and I think that a lot of those terms exist as a way for people who are non-binary to try to describe what they're experiencing with a like related, not related perhaps, but like a concept that evokes how they're feeling, right? Like in this way where like historically we had heraldry. So like, you know, this family has the symbol of a lion. And so there's like an ego that gets built around that family, and they are called by those terms or whatever. And like, oh, so you're prideful, you know, his pride has pride. Those kind of like terms get used. And so I think basically because gender is so flexible that like, what does it even mean to be a woman if you could have long hair or short hair, or you could have painted fingernails, or you could have dirt under your nails because you work on cars all day.
Absolutely.
Like, so because the concept of man and woman are so flexible, I honestly kind of sometimes think that these very specific gender terms like tree gender is like, that is almost more coherent in a way because it's evoking something very specific. So like trees, you know, they are steadfast, they grow slowly. It's part of nature. They're grounded. So like there's all of this sort of associated concepts in a way that like honestly it sometimes feels like it's more solid than saying I'm a woman, because what does I'm a woman mean? Like again, you could be any type of woman, and it's only telling you like a slim amount of information. So basically the way that I've come to view those types of hyper specific and seemingly abstract gender descriptions is just like folks trying to make sense of how far their alienation is from the idea of being a man or a woman.
Absolutely, I can understand that, and that makes a lot more sense than the way I've heard it described before. That's kind of why I use the astral as an, you know, kind of a point, because in my opinion, you know, we're all stardust. We all came from the stars. We'll go back to the stars one day. So, in my opinion, personally, you know, I identify with that a lot. Now, I don't know if I would go as far as to call myself astral gender, but like you said, I can identify, I can validate, and I can see that within my mind and how that makes sense and to who I am. And so that's one of the reasons I was asking, because to me, that's the hitting the nail on the head. That's what we're trying to do for everybody. It's trying to get everyone to learn who they are, come to terms with who they are, accept who they are, and then put themselves out into the world to be seen and be beautiful. But it just seems like a lot of times we're getting lost on the way there. And I'm trying to find a way to help people basically understand what you just explained to me.
Yeah, to kind of expand on what Lux was talking about with like heraldry, a good example of this would be like Richard the Lionhearted. You know, we all know who King Richard the Lionhearted is, you know, from like Robin Hood, etc. But an actual historical figure referred to as Lionhearted. And like that was an identifier for this specific man. And in a similar way, like you're not saying he's an actual lion. You're not saying he's got the heart of a lion. You're attributing a set of characteristics to him, and he's identified with that in a similar sense to like, you know, astral gender or tree gender. This is something that we actually do far more commonly, I think, than a lot of people tend to realize. It's just that now we have people who are explicitly connecting their gender identity to that same thing we've always been doing.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time. And I would say I'm about to have to go, but I think it was a really constructive conversation. And thank you again for your time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thanks for calling. Appreciate you. We'll talk to you again later.
See ya. Bye.
That was a call. Remember to like, leave a comment longer than 8 words, really helps with the algorithm, and subscribe. And also check out the live show every Thursday. Links all down below. And let's keep on going.
Riverboat Jack is coming to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube and swishy streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, gaming, and plenty more. Your sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord.